Hello, everyone, and welcome to our makeup lecture for Thursday, September the 12th, as well as Tuesday, the 17th. We're missing two classes this week and next, so I just wanted to make this lecture to sort of reinforce all of the things that I started talking about in our last class and also explain the remaining general rules for short arguments that I didn't have a chance to talk about in our last class. The 6 rules for short arguments that I'm going to talk about in this lecture are very important and I think essential for understanding the rest of the material in the course. I'm going to explain them slowly, one by one, and I'm also going to give numerous examples to help you understand. If you still have some trouble with these concepts, feel free to watch this lecture again and again, although attendance is only taken once. And if you still have any questions, feel free to send me a message on Kakao Work or an email, and I would be happy to explain any of these ideas in more detail. Okay, so over the next 40 or 45 minutes or so, I would like to quickly review some of the ideas that I talked about in our last class. Let me just turn this off. As well as introduce some of the other concepts which you read about in chapter 1 in the textbook. So just a quick review. As I mentioned in our last class, when I say to give an argument or somebody gives an argument, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are negative feelings or it is some kind of fight. An argument in this context simply means supporting your opinion with reasons or evidence. So you have a conclusion, an opinion, and you offer a set of reasons or evidence in support of that opinion. That's what I mean by giving an argument. So you can listen to somebody give an argument, or you can give an argument to someone else, or you can give each other an argument. So these 6 general rules for short arguments, which were introduced in the textbook. We have rule number 1, resolve premises and conclusion. Rule number 2, unfold your ideas in natural order. Rule number 3, start from reliable premises. Rule number 4, be concrete and concise. Rule number 5, build on substance and not loaded language. And rule number 6, use consistent terms. I think these 6 rules are very important for you when you make your own arguments. So when you give an argument, you should make sure that your premises and conclusion are clearly distinguishable to the listener. You should make sure that your ideas are unfolded or are listed in a natural order. And you have to decide what is the best sequence. Do you want to start with the conclusion and then list your reasons? Or do you want to start listing premises that the listener will agree with and slowly lead them to a conclusion which they might not have thought of or previously approved of? Number 3, starting from reliable premises, and that's one I shall be talking about in a little bit of detail. Being concrete and concise, building on substance, not loaded language, and using consistent terms. Like I said, these are important not only for you when you make your own arguments, but also when you listen to other arguments, when you encounter arguments, whether they are spoken arguments, whether they are written arguments, or if they are visual arguments of some kind. It's very important to keep these things in mind as well. If you listen to somebody make an argument, you have to distinguish what are their premises and what is their conclusion. Is there one single conclusion that the person is trying to make? It's not always clear, especially if a person has not rehearsed their argument in advance. Sometimes people's arguments, especially spoken arguments, are not as clear as prepared written arguments. It's also important to remember that you don't necessarily have to agree with their premises or even their conclusion, but you should try to understand at least what those premises are and what the conclusion is that the person is trying to make. So rule number one, let's start with that. You want to resolve premises and conclusion. In your own argument, you want to have a very clear idea of the point that you're trying to prove. Okay, what is the point that you want to get across? You obviously need some kind of reasons or evidence in order to support your conclusion. Those reasons or those pieces of evidence, those are things that we call premises. And it's important that you have your premises and your conclusion very clearly distinguished for the leader or for the reader or for the listener. One way that you can do that is to include indicator words in your argument. Or if you are listening to or reading somebody else's argument, look for indicator words in their argument. So when someone is listing their premises, they will often begin their premise, one of their premises, by saying because. Then because of that premise, that leads to a conclusion, or since, and then give a premise and then lead to their conclusion, or given that. A conclusion is often prefaced with therefore, or so, or consequently. Okay, so the textbook gives us the very quick example of, we should eat more beans. And you could have two very simple premises for these. Beans are healthy. They're very high in fiber and protein. Eating more beans could lead to a longer, healthier life. So therefore, you should eat more beans. Now, this is a very simple argument, starting with two premises and having a conclusion. It's not the most interesting argument or the most controversial issue, but it is a good example of two premises that are clearly distinguished from the conclusion. When you read these sentences, it is very clear what the conclusion is and what the reasons are for coming to that conclusion. For example, number one, professors shouldn't give students grades on their assignments because grades give bad incentives and they don't provide useful feedback. Okay, the person here is starting with their conclusion. Professors shouldn't give students grades on their assignments. That's the argument the person is giving. The premises, the reasons for their conclusions, come after in the second half of the argument. Grades give bad incentives, premise number one, and they don't provide useful feedback. That would be premise number two. In this case, we have the head of the spy organization is very dangerous. He's also very clever. He's a master of disguise. He has 12 names, 100 appearances, but there's one thing he can't disguise. He's missing the tip of his little finger. All of these are just premises, one by one, unfolded in a natural order, leading to the conclusion. And the conclusion, you can see, is prefaced with so. When you hear the word so, you can very clearly sense that the conclusion is about to be expressed. So if you ever meet a man who is missing the top finger or the top joint of his little finger, you should be very careful. Okay, that's the conclusion. If you meet the man who's missing the top joint of his little finger, you should be very careful. Why? Well, that's explained in the first half. This person is the head of a spy organization. He is incredibly clever, master of disguise, has 100 names and different appearances. So you should be careful. Number three, here we have the example from the Declaration of Independence. We have a number of premises here. People are created equal and born with unalienable rights. Governments exist to protect those rights. When a government violates those rights, people have a right to rebel against the government and create a new one. By the way, the purpose of these premises is to lead the reader through until they get to a conclusion which they might not have agreed with beforehand. You'll notice that the premises here are ones that people would probably be inclined to agree with. People are created equal and born with unalienable rights. This is something which you have to accept in order to continue on with the argument. If you believe that people are not created equal and that people don't have certain rights which they are born with, well, then you won't be able to progress through the argument. Then we get to the conclusion. The American colonists have a right to rebel against the King of Great Britain. Why? Because the king has violated some of these unalienable rights. I'll skip the one about Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau. I think I talked about that one enough in class. One of my personal favorite conspiracy theories. In this case, here you'll notice that the conclusion is put in the middle of the argument. Typically, conclusions either come at the beginning or at the end of an argument, but that is not always the case. So I think this is a good example where the conclusion is put in a location that you might not expect it to be in. So when you are listening to someone make an argument, always be on the lookout for what the person's point might actually be, because although in the textbook, you will often find the conclusion at the beginning or the end, in reality, people don't always make their arguments in such clear and identifiable ways. Okay, this next one here, the ad for President Lyndon Johnson in 1964, the controversial political ad. Obviously, in this case, as with any political advertisement, the conclusion is quite simple. Vote for this person, don't vote for another person. Now, the premises that underlie the argument in this political campaign ad might not be clear at first. You might remember in not our previous class, but 2 classes ago, when I asked, how much information is necessary in order to engage in critical thinking. If you don't have certain background knowledge, can you actually critically analyze an argument? How important is it to have, a long list of facts made up of dates, places, names, and other things in your mind? I think this is a good case where a little bit of background information is important. In this case, this presidential campaign ad came out in 1964 when President Johnson was running for election. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated the previous year in November 1963. Not the only president to be assassinated in November 1963. Be interested if anyone can name the other president that was also assassinated in 1963 in November. But it was a very tense time internationally. Obviously, you had the Cold War. You had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was where the Soviet Union was trying to build I believe it was nuclear rocket sites on the island of Cuba, and there were submarines in the water that were on the way. President Kennedy and I believe it was Khrushchev were engaged in a very dangerous nuclear standoff, and the world came very, very close to World War III. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and we are able to come through to the year 2024. It's important to keep in mind, though, what is the context for this political campaign ad? And obviously, this is one in which people were very worried about the possibility of nuclear war. And that tension you can see in this political advertisement. So the conclusion is obviously to vote for President Johnson. And the premises, which are not stated explicitly, I believe in the campaign ad, he talks about, all of God's children should have a chance to live together, or else we will face the darkness. But what I'm going to do here is just describe what I think are his underlying premises, and that is that the world is a very dangerous place. It's a very unstable time. It's the Cold War. The upcoming elections is very important for the future, and President Johnson will keep Americans safe if he is elected. It's interesting to see how decades can change, generations can pass, but a lot of the political discourse remains quite similar. And finally, if people make the wrong choice, the consequences could be disastrous. Now, I just want to point out, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with the premises that are present in this campaign ad, but it's important to try and understand what those premises are, and whether or not you actually agree with them is not important at this point. This is something that I'm going to come back to again and again in the course. I think it's very important that people understand the arguments of people that they disagree with, because in many cases, I think we have a very strong emotional urge to disagree with people who have different opinions. And quite often we don't think very deeply about what the reasons are for the opinions that people on the other side might have. And I think it's a very good intellectual exercise to try and articulate in as neutral and fair and balanced a way as possible what people who you strongly disagree with actually think. After you articulate their premises and their conclusion, yes, it's a wonderful thing to try and find flaws in their argument and point out the weaknesses. But first, you want to try and understand what the person is actually trying to say. What argument are they trying to give? Okay, this one here is quite simple. I think women are very attracted to men who volunteer for submarine service. This man volunteered for submarine service, therefore, beautiful women are attracted to him. So, if you want to have beautiful women be attracted to you, then you should also volunteer for submarine service. I think this is a recruitment advertisement from the early 1940s, and it is obviously appealing to certain, shall we say, baser instincts in men in order to convince them to sign up for certain military service. This one here, this is a public service announcement. Pedestrians don't come with airbags. This is encouraging people to pay attention to road safety and to remember that cars can be dangerous. Car accidents can cause a great deal of harm. However, drivers have certain levels of safety that pedestrians don't have. Drivers can have seat belts. They can also have air belts, or not air belts, sorry, safety belts, seat belts. However, pedestrians do not have any form of protection. Therefore, it's important for drivers to consider pedestrians when they are driving. Okay, this one from my hometown, obviously stating that 3M security glass is very strong. It is so strong that they are willing to put $1 million behind glass and risk somebody breaking the glass in order to steal it. Therefore, if you want to have the highest quality security glass, you should buy 3M security glass. Okay, next, unfold your ideas in natural order. This is something that I've mentioned earlier. You want to unfold your ideas in a logical order, which will not only make sense for the reader or the listener, but bring them into the argument. Sometimes people will begin their argument with premises, and they start with premises that are very easy to agree with. And they do this to try and bring the person to a conclusion that they might not have thought about or might not agree with at first. Other times, people might want to state their conclusion right up front at the very beginning, and only then go back and list the reasons for having that opinion. Whichever way you choose, it's important to find one that flows naturally. So we have the example here of eating more beans. In this case, the argument starts with the conclusion, we should eat more beans, and then we get the premises. One reason is that beans are healthy, and we get the example of they're higher in fibers and protein, they're lower in fat and cholesterol than what most people know. Then we get a second premise, bean dishes can be quite varied and exciting. We have the added detail of spicy black bean tacos, or sorry, spicy black bean taco fillings or hummus. Yeah, quite a simple argument, but you can see how the structure works. Begin with the conclusion, then give me a premise, give me an example or detail to back up that premise, and then give me a second premise together with a further example or detail. If you muddle the order, obviously the argument becomes incoherent and it's ineffective as an argument in that case. In this case, the conclusion and the premises are not easily distinguished, and that can cause confusion in the reader or listener. Okay, we talked about GMO fish, which I thought was an interesting topic. Everyone was able to identify, I think, quite easily what the premises were and what would be a natural order to sequence these ideas in. Beginning with the context, a little bit of background, and then giving us the issue, then listing two of the main ideas, and then finally giving us the conclusion, which is that non-genetically modified fish would actually have an advantage over genetically modified fish because genetically modified salmon are not designed to flourish in the wild. Okay. Here is, should I do this one? This is one that I've done in some classes, but I don't think we'll have time to do it in our class. This is a short activity where I would get people to put together in order this argument regarding how PowerPoint slides are ruining higher education, but I'll leave that for now. Okay. So general rule number 3, starting from reliable premises. This is a really, really important rule. One of the biggest problems that people have when they make their arguments is they start from premises that are not reliable. And when I say they're not reliable, they are unreliable premises. In some cases, it might be that the premises are false. The person is starting with information that is not factual. It's not correct. It is disprovable. On the other hand, sometimes a premise is unreliable because it is controversial. That doesn't mean that it is untrue, but it means that it needs extensive support in order for an audience to accept it. And when you start an argument, the best thing to do is start with reliable premises, where people will listen to your arguments and say, yes, 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 I agree with what the person is saying so far. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples here. Progress from premises that people already accept to conclusions that they previously did not accept. In many cases, people will give an argument where they start with premises that people are already willing to agree with. And they do this step by step until it logically reaches a conclusion that the person did not think about before, or perhaps was not ready to accept before. So it's a good idea to start with premises that not only you, but your audience is ready to accept. So try to use widely accepted facts. And by the way, this will change depending on what demographic, I guess, constitutes your audience, what sort of people are listening to you. Then support it with reliable sources. It's a very good idea to avoid premises that are demonstrably false or controversial. Remember, if one of your premises is quite controversial and your audience is not ready to accept it, they're not going to accept your conclusion. You might actually need a completely separate argument in order just to get the audience to accept that one premise. So it's a good idea to begin your argument with premises that your audience is ready to accept. So try to avoid wild generalizations or things that cannot be easily proven. And like I mentioned before, unreliable does not mean that it's false. It just means that it's not an idea that your audience is necessarily willing to accept right away. So here's an example. Artificial intelligence will soon be able to run cities or even whole continents. Artificial intelligence has been advancing quickly in recent years. One new artificial intelligence program, AlphaZero, can become an expert in complex games like chess in a matter of hours, after being taught nothing more than the basic rules. If AlphaZero can master complex games, then surely it won't be long before it can run cities or continents. Okay, now let's take a look at some of these premises. Okay, artificial intelligence has been advancing quite quickly in recent years. That's quite reliable. I think most people would say, yes, you know what? It's common knowledge that AI has been developing very, very quickly, especially the last few years. The second premise, AlphaZero can become an expert in complex games like chess in just a few hours. It's not reliable because people probably don't know about this particular AI, but it could be made reliable if you can provide a statistic or some reasonable evidence so we can accept that AlphaZero actually can become an expert in complex games. We want to know that that is actually true. And then we reach our third premise. If AlphaZero can master complex games, then it won't be long before it can run cities or continents. This is where the argument really starts to run into trouble, because obviously figuring out how to win at chess is very, very different from figuring out how to run a human society. Human systems are much more complicated than chess. You obviously have a much greater number of players. People are influenced by things like emotion and opinion, and trying to run a city or a continent is a much more complex task than trying to win a game of chess. Not to mention, a game of chess is a simple competitive game between two players, whereas trying to run a city or continent is actually trying to create the best overall conditions for the majority of people in that society, which is considerably different from a game of chess. Okay, let's take a look at this next example. Despite what skeptics would have you believe, many people are capable of seeing ghosts. Okay, I think you can probably see right away that we have a problem with reliable premises here. Many people are capable of seeing ghosts. This is a very unreliable premise because the existence of ghosts is a controversial claim, and at the very least would require substantial support from various experts and scientific evidence in order to get people to accept that claim. Ghosts are real, and anyone with the psychic ability known as extrasensory perception, or ESP, is capable of seeing them. ESP is a real phenomenon, according to Professor Joseph Ryan of Duke University. In fact, about half of all people have ESP, although many never realize it. One of the big problems here also is, we'll talk about this later in the course, where we talk about using sources to your advantage. The argument uses Professor Joseph Ryan as an expert. However, we have no idea, first of all, what is Joseph Ryan's specialty? What is his field of research? He may be a professor, but we don't know anything else about him. Also, we're not aware of whether Professor Ryan's opinion is one that is generally accepted, or if he is an outlier. Is he somebody that has an opinion which is so uncommon that the fact that he espouses this opinion is not convincing? The third one here, there are other advanced civilizations in our galaxy. To see why this must be so, consider the following facts. Humans have already spotted thousands of planets in our corner of the galaxy, and many look like they could support life. The galaxy contains billions of stars. At least some of these hospitable planets around those billions of stars will probably develop intelligent life capable of producing advanced technology. Okay, we start off with the conclusion. There are other advanced civilizations in our galaxy, which is a very strong claim to make. Not stating the probability, but stating to the greatest degree of certainty, there are other advanced civilizations. And then we have a few premises. Okay, humans have already spotted thousands of planets in our corner of the galaxy. That's a fairly reliable premise. We know that we've developed telescopes that are capable of seeing into the vast reaches of space. Many look like they could support life. That is much less reliable, but could be made reliable with sufficient support. The galaxy contains billions of stars. Okay, that sounds fairly reliable. At least some of the hospitable planets around those billions of stars will probably develop intelligent life capable of producing advanced technology. That is a very controversial claim and would not work as a reliable premise. Okay, assault with a deadly weapon. I think this is an example which I brought up in our very first class, and I hope you like the joke. Get it? It's assault with a deadly weapon. Anyway, this is where the example of a GIF as a deadly weapon comes from. When someone uses a potentially lethal object to intentionally hurt someone, the aggressor is assaulting the victim with a deadly weapon. It is possible to send a GIF to someone's phone of a flashing strobe light. Flashing strobe lights can cause people with epilepsy to have a seizure. Epileptic seizures can be lethal. Therefore, sending a GIF of a flashing strobe light to an epileptic person's phone for the purpose of inducing a seizure should count as assault with a deadly weapon. This is a very interesting example, and I think the premises here are quite reliable. Okay, we start with the first one. when someone uses a potentially lethal object to intentionally hurt someone, the aggressor is assaulting the victim with a deadly weapon. Okay, this is a definition. What is assault with a deadly weapon? Using something that could kill somebody to intentionally hurt them. Okay, I think most people would agree with that. It is possible to send a gift to someone's phone of a flashing strobe light. Well, I think most people would accept that, yes, it is possible using various apps, various platforms to send a GIF from one person to another. And a GIF can include a flashing strobe light. Also, epileptic seizures can be lethal, and flashing strobe lights can cause people with epilepsy to have a seizure. I think both of these are fairly commonly accepted ideas. Therefore, and here's where the conclusion comes in, therefore, sending a GIF of a flashing strobe light to an epileptic person's phone for the purpose, so with the intention of inducing a seizure, should count as assault with a deadly weapon. I think this is a very good case of using several reliable premises to come to a conclusion that you might not have considered before. Before reading this argument, I had never considered that sending a GIF could count as assault with a deadly weapon. But if I follow the premises one by one, and this is a very good example of unfolding them in a natural order, it's very easy to go from the premises to the conclusion. The person starts off with a definition of assaulting someone with a deadly weapon. Then we get a couple of premises related to sending a GIF and how epileptic seizures can be caused by strobe lights. And then we get this surprise, I think somewhat surprising, or at the very least, uncommon conclusion that if a strobe light GIF can cause an epileptic person to have a seizure, and these seizures can be lethal, if you send a GIF of a flashing strobe light to an epileptic person on purpose because you want them to see that GIF and then induce an epileptic seizure, yes, that should count as assault with a deadly weapon. I think this is a very good case of using very strong, reliable premises in order to come to a conclusion that somebody might not have considered before. When you heard this argument for the first time, you might not have even guessed what the conclusion was going to be. But sentence by sentence, you would have been pulled into the argument, and each sentence you would probably agree with because they were based on fact and were generally, let's say, commonly accepted ideas. Very good example here. Okay, next. I think it's also important when making an argument to try and be as concise as possible. So don't be overly wordy. Just try and make it as short and simple as possible. Remember the KISS philosophy, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, stupid. Try not to use unnecessary jargon when you don't have to, and try to keep your message as clear and focused and on point as possible. Here there are a few examples that I found that are from either famous people or movie quotes that you might not be familiar with. At a point in time subsequent to the present point in time, I will once again be in the location where I am presently located. How could you say that briefly? I'll be back. If you haven't seen Terminator 2, you should. We must strive to exhibit in our own persons the sorts of alterations we most fervently desire to observe in the world that we inhabit. This is an overly wordy rewording of Gandhi's "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Let it be the case at the present time and in the future that the probability of a positive outcome for you is relatively high. If you've seen The Hunger Games, you might remember that. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Yeah, that's another one. All right, next, build on substance, not overtone. This all comes down to using loaded language. I think it's a very good idea to avoid using overly emotional terms when you make an argument, and also being aware when someone else is using overly emotional or loaded language in their own arguments. We live in a time when a lot of communication is done over the internet, and there are many cases where people, sometimes politicians hoping to attain office, will use language which is not based on substance, but is either trying to induce fear or filled with loaded emotional terms that are trying to emotionally manipulate someone into thinking a certain way. So be on the lookout for loaded language in your own arguments and the arguments of others. Here's an example. Certain irresponsible American politicians have been spewing lies about the latest attempts at reform. Whether these lies come from a combination of stupidity and a hysterical imagination, or from cleverness and a willingness to exploit innocent Americans for personal political gain, these lies must be exposed for the damaging falsehoods they are. Okay, this quote, I think this is from a commentator on a quite popular American news broadcasting station. The problem with this is twofold. First of all, there are so many terms in here which are emotionally loaded as to manipulate a listener into automatically agreeing with the message. However, even if you rewrite it in a way which is much more fair and balanced, so, for example, certain American politicians have been making false statements about the latest attempt at reform, and the falsehood of those statements should be made clear to the public. These two statements, the first one here and the revised version, even after you take out the loaded language, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. It just means that you removed the loaded language. Removing loaded language does not necessarily turn a false statement into an accurate statement. Yeah, even after removing the loaded language, statement might still not be true. I mean, are politicians making false statements? We haven't heard any evidence yet. Also, we don't get any specifics in the original argument. And when we do neutralize the language, that doesn't take away the need for finding out whether the statement is true or not. So look for loaded language. That's right. Yeah, let's take a look at some of these following examples and see if we can find any examples of loaded language. I cannot stay here doing nothing while innocent lives are lost. There is no one else willing to defend the world from Ares, so I must go. Of course I'm going to beat Henry Cooper. He's nothing. He's a tramp. He's a bum. I'll knock him out in 5 rounds. No, 3. Trump's wall is just another fantasy of his fevered imagination. But the wall wouldn't be just an exercise in xenophobia. It would be an ugly scar across a hot zone of precious biodiversity, wreaking untold devastation to boost Trump's fragile ego. Building the wall would be devastatingly stupid. One of the reasons why I included this quote is because I think there are many people who would be inclined to agree with Juan Cole's argument. However, even if you agree with somebody's argument, it's important to keep in mind that you have to notice the emotionally loaded language that is being used here. It's very easy to point out loaded language in the arguments of people whom you disagree with. But it's also important to realize when someone, if they are giving an argument that you agree with, but still using loaded language, it's important to call them out on that too. Okay, here is one which I think is fairly balanced. If you are trying to lose weight, it's important that you not skip meals. If you skip meals, you're likely to experience hunger and food cravings later, making it harder for you to stick to your diet. Instead of skipping meals to control your calorie intake, eat appropriately sized meals on a regular basis. Okay, so here we start off with the conclusion. If you're trying to lose weight, it's important you don't skip meals. And then we get some fairly balanced descriptions about why that is the case, why it's important not to skip meals, what you should do instead. So keep in mind, not every argument will have loaded language, but it's very important to be on the lookout. Okay, next, remember to use consistent terms. It's very easy to fall into the mistake of equivocation. Equivocation is a logical fallacy that we look at later in the course. If you don't use consistent terms in your argument, it's very easy to slide from one meaning to another, which is equivocation. And it also means that your argument can become less clear for the listener. So let's take a look at these two examples here. So the first one is effective, and the second one obviously does not use consistent terms. So when you learn to care for a pet, you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature that depends on you. When you learn to depend on the needs of a dependent creature, you learn to be a better parent. Therefore, when you learn to take care for a pet or of a pet, you learn to be a better parent. Now, in this case, by repeating the term dependent creature, it helps the person make their argument very clear. If you learn how to take care of a pet, that will help you learn to be a better parent, because when you raise a pet, you take care of a dependent creature, and when you raise children, you are also taking care of a dependent creature. If the person does not use consistent terms, the argument can become much less clear. So for example, I'll have to speed things up a little bit here. When you learn to take care for a pet, you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature, watching and recognizing carefully when a cat or dog needs you. Your ability to recognize needs and adjust your behavior accordingly can improve toward young children as well. Becoming a more responsive keeper of domestic animals can therefore enhance your familial skills too. You see here, not only is the argument much wordier and verbose than needs to be, but we also don't get the repetition of dependent creature. Instead, the person keeps using different terms. Dependent creature, then cat or dog. Remember, cat or dog are just two specific examples, and a cat or dog is quite different from just saying a pet. Then calling them domestic animals and such. Try to keep your argument as clear as possible. And by using consistent terms and avoiding an example like this, you can make sure that people understand your argument much more clearly. Okay. Okay, so just a quick review before I sign off and give you a little bit of homework. Remember to resolve premises and conclusion in your arguments. Make it so that people can clearly understand what point you're trying to make and what the ideas are that support that conclusion. Remember to sequence those ideas in a natural order. It's up to you to decide what is the best order for your ideas. Do you want to start with the conclusion? Do you want to put the conclusion in the end? Your premises, what order should they be put in? Can you mix up the sequence, or do you need to follow them in a certain way to make the argument clear? That is up to you for each individual argument. You have to look and see how well they follow. Very good idea is to start from a general claim and then get more specific. Starting from reliable premises, start with things that are true and easily acceptable to the people in your audience. Remember to be concrete and concise. You don't need to be too wordy. Try to avoid emotionally loaded language. It's intellectually dishonest to try and manipulate your audience by using emotionally loaded language. And remember to use consistent terms in order to make your argument clear. Okay, and now time for your homework. I've decided to give you your first short writing assignment for homework this time around. I was originally thinking about just doing a very short participation activity, but we are missing 2 classes, so I figured I will give you your first 5-point assignment now. So here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to practice constructing an argument and expressing it. I would like you to find a recent news or magazine article online on which you would like to make a comment. There are many magazines and news sites that publish letters and comments about recent articles. But what I want you to do is just find an article, and it can be about a current event or some social issue, whatever it is, it's up to you. And I want you to construct an argument that makes a point about the article you've chosen. So decide what the point of your letter will be and whether you'll start with your conclusion or your premises, and then rewrite your outline as a letter or a comment that could be posted online. So I'm going to give you until 11:59 p.m. October 19th to upload it to Cyber Campus Assignments. Now, if you're a little confused, what does Mr. Barnard want me to do? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So go on the internet and find a news article about something that you're interested in, whether it's a social issue, a current event, something political, something related to entertainment, whatever, it's up to you. Then I want you to give me your opinion about that topic in general. And I want you to first list your premises and conclusion in point form, and then rewrite those points into a single paragraph. And you can upload that to Cyber Campus Assignments. When you put it on Cyber Campus Assignments, you don't need to use Microsoft Word. You just can type it into the text box. That should be fine. So here's an example. Go over here. So let's say, so provide me a link for your article. Like, let's say you saw an article about a student who died after eating marijuana edibles. This is an example I have here. So just write article, then put the link, and then you've read the article, so you have an opinion about this topic. I want you to list 3 premises, which will be 3 reasons for your opinion on this topic, and then give me your conclusion. What is your opinion after telling me the reasons for your opinion? So in this case, you might say, Maybe your first premise is marijuana edibles are dangerous. I think that's a fairly acceptable premise, fairly reliable. Children should not be able to access marijuana edibles. I think most people would also agree with that. And number three, child-proof packaging will reduce the risk of children accidentally consuming and being hurt by marijuana edibles. Marijuana, like alcohol or any other drug, if it is consumed by children or people that are unable to handle its potency, it can be very dangerous and, depending on the situation, possibly fatal. So the conclusion, therefore, marijuana edibles should be sold and kept in child-proof packaging. I've put here that idea, so somebody now writing an internet comment about marijuana edibles, using these three premises, and then those premises leading to the conclusion. So in this case, things have changed a lot since I was young. Back then, no one thought marijuana was dangerous. It's true. Yes, it was illegal, and yes, you could get in trouble with the police if you were caught smoking it, but that was it. The legalization of marijuana, however, has combined with the exploding popularity of marijuana edibles, poses dangers to children who might accidentally consume them, thinking they're candy. If you're not aware of this issue, yeah, some marijuana edibles in the United States and Canada, they look like small gummy bears. So they do look like children's candies. Marijuana edibles, like marijuana-infused gummy bears, ought to be sold and kept in child-proof packaging, packaging that children cannot open. Adults should think of marijuana edibles like a loaded gun. Both are dangerous to children. Just as responsible gun owners keep their guns locked away in a gun safe, responsible purchasers of marijuana edibles ought to keep them locked up where kids can't get to them. So that's about 120, 130 words. That's what I'm looking for. Here's a second example. So in this case, post a link for an article about why meat is bad for the environment. Here we've got three premises. Premise number one, a lot of the evidence used to argue that animal agriculture is harmful to people and the environment is in fact flawed. Not sure about the reliability of that premise. Premise two, sheep and cattle are sustainable food systems that consume usable land and waste products that ultimately produce nutritious food for human consumption. And premise number three, there's a lot of scientific evidence that shows the health benefits of a meat-based diet. Conclusion, animal agriculture is good for people and the environment. So this is a person writing in response to this article, why is meat bad for the environment? But this person disagrees that meat is bad for the environment. This person thinks that actually having a meat-based diet is actually not only good for people, but it's good for the environment. And then the person writes their paragraph here. So this is what I'm asking you to do. So find an article about a topic that you're interested in. It doesn't matter to me if you agree or disagree with the article. Put the link in the text box on Cyber Campus, and then tell me your premises and your conclusion. So what is your opinion on that topic, and what are the reasons for your opinion on that topic? Then take those premises and conclusion and expand on them, turning it into a paragraph between 100, let's say between 100 and 125 words, approximately. Put that all together in the text box on Cyber Campus assignments by 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, October the 19th, and that will be your first homework assignment for our class. I look forward to seeing not only your arguments, but also the articles on which they are based. Thank you very much for watching this lecture. I hope you enjoy your Chuseok mini vacation, and I'll see everybody back in class on Thursday, October the 19th. Okay. Have fun. Keep it real.